Good morning. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. Thank you for joining. I think we now, not sure if we have everyone. I'm not sure if Karima's joined us yet, but also wanted to welcome Judah as our guest today. He's simply here to observe his first full board meeting. The next one, I guess, will be in his formal capacity. So welcome, Judah. Everybody has had a chance to review the agenda, and I'm sort of formally calling the meeting to order. And the first matter, of course, on the agenda is, as usual, is the call to order. And I want to acknowledge that although we are meeting virtually from different regions of the country, the registered head office of CPATA is in the National Capital Region, which is the traditional unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. And we thank all of the generations of Anishinaabe Algonquin people, and indeed the many generations of all of the indigenous nations of this land, including the Inuit and Métis peoples who have and continue to take care of this beautiful land in which we share. Je reconnais aussi la présence de longue date de toutes les Premières Nations.
I also recognize the participation of all the First Nations in Ontario and the First Nations in all of Canada and the Métis as well.
That the government had not yet made any formal announcements. There are two remaining positions that had not been filled. The latest from ISED is that the announcement is imminent, and I believe it is very imminent. And I think the CEO and I will have more to say about that in camera at the end of the meeting. All right. So with those introductory remarks, I want to now just confirm that none of the members of the board have declared any conflicts of interest with respect to the proposed agenda items today. And unless anyone has any conflict to declare now, we can move to the agenda. So does anyone have any conflicts of interest to declare with any of the matters on the agenda? Hearing none, then we will move to the consent agenda, which is item 2 on your list for the agenda today. And as you know, the consent agenda items are proposed to be dealt with by unanimous consent without debate. Directors can seek clarification or ask questions without removing the matter from the consent agenda. And indeed, that is we're going to be dealing with one issue that's arisen from the consent matters, but any director may request a matter come off the agenda for debate. I haven't received any formal request that occur. So the matters on the consent agenda are approval of the board minutes of November the 12th, which are at page 4 of your materials. The report of the Nominations and Board Development Committee of November the 15th, and that's at page 9 of your materials. The report of the Governance Committee, November the 17th, 2022, at page 12, and the report of the Audit and Risk Committee, November the 15th, and that's at page 14 of the PDF. Now, I know that Leonora had raised an issue with respect to some of the matters reported on the consent agenda, and I'm going to ask Daryl Pink to just address those concerns.
If I may, Tom, I have
Ruth.
a couple. Yeah, I have a couple of questions regarding items on the consent agenda as well, and
sure.
I didn't realize that the practice was to reach out to the chair in advance of the meeting. I simply thought if directors had something they wanted to discuss, on matters of the consent agenda, we would just mention it at the board meeting. So
yeah, no, and I'm not,
I didn't
I didn't
realize
want to
there was a-
suggest that that's not the case. I'm just saying that in this case,
Okay.
one issue was raised in advance by Leonora, so that I know that that's one issue that has to be raised, but I didn't want to suggest that that's it. You have to raise some more.
Oh, okay.
No. The
Great.
practice
So I
is
have
to,
a
if you have any
potential.
questions, by all means, so.
So I have a potential addition to the November minutes, and I have a question regarding the ARC report to the board. So I'll bring those forward whenever you like, but go ahead with Leonora's
Sure.
question.
Daryl, did you want to address, first of all, Leonora's question was relating to, remind me again, I can't remember.
Related to performance, the process for performance review for the new CEO.
Yes, thank you.
And
Very, very good
There was a
question.
note in the report from the governance committee. I was not present at that committee as I was on holiday, and I hadn't adequately provided the information that the committee needed to assess where we were, as they are responsible for shepherding the CEO performance review, at least prior to it coming to the board. So there are really two aspects to the performance review. Part of it, and the piece that was absent from the note from the governance committee, relates to the work that ROAR is doing with us as part of the transition. And that will involve the setting of performance expectations and processes for review. And that arrangement with ROAR was made subsequent to our retention of Boyden, who undertook the CEO search. And as part of their package, they do provide an initial performance review in the first year. We'll work with Boyden to postpone their work because we'll continue to work with ROAR, and the Boyden assistance for the board will come in year 2 of Judah's tenure with CPATA. So that was the piece of information that was missing, and some ambiguity because some of the dates in the meeting didn't make sense. And I think that will clarify it. So we'll be working with ROAR over the next several months to do performance expectations and a process for review, and then a more formalized process will click in year 2.
Leonora, does that answer your concern? Yeah. Any other questions arising out of that from members of the board before I turn to Ruth? Okay, thank you, Daryl, for that clarification. Ruth?
Thanks very much.
Have references to the particular minutes that you want to discuss?
Yeah, November, the minutes included in the consent agenda. So the minutes from our November board meeting.
Right.
Within those minutes, there's an action that says, it talks about our regulatory checklist meeting in January, and it indicates that the CEO will invite the chairs of all committees to attend that meeting to demonstrate their compliance with the regulatory checklist. We had also determined to invite the governance committee because developing and monitoring a process for the board to hold itself accountable to its regulatory duties lies with the governance committee. So I just didn't know, do we need to minute that the governance committee will also be in attendance to fulfill its fiduciary duties, so to speak, or is it fine not to have it in the minutes? That was just my question.
Why don't I make sure I'll include it in the minutes for this meeting so that it's clear.
So, so we'll take that as a friendly
Perfect.
amendment to the minutes.
That's great, thank you. Then I have a question on the minutes. It's not not a recommended change, but it was around the bylaws. So where we were talking about accepting the recommendation, regarding a change to the bylaws. Just a question: is there any update on whether the Department of Justice will have the revised bylaws ready to be adopted in the spring of 2023? Any update on that?
We've been working very hard over the last several weeks. We've had more meetings. I could count them, but I can't tell you right now how many we've had. So the bylaws, the plan is that we will have a draft back from Justice in a near final version from the drafters by the end of the calendar year. Within the Department of Justice, they then go into the editing process. That's a separate section of justice, and then the jurilingual process. So we'll receive that feedback. We are still aiming for adoption by the end of March or early April, depending on exactly what publication of the Canada Gazette we can meet. There's a slight hitch that has arisen because we are losing the Francophone drafter at the end of this year. She is taking a transfer within the Department of Justice. So there'll be a new person coming on board. We have been in touch with the head of that section with respect to who the replacement will be. We don't know yet, but we have put our dibs on seeking a senior person who will be able to jump in without a large learning curve. So we're hopeful that will not create a significant delay for us, but it's out of our hands. We are making significant progress. I think almost all the issues that we had identified will be addressed. And I hope we will be able to bring to the board in a confidential way the draft early in 2023, so you can see where we are and what some of the issues will be. So progress is being made.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay, my next question is, why is there no report to the board from the audit committee chair, like there is for the governance committee and the nominating and board development committee? And just, you know, from a governance oversight perspective, the board should hear from the committee chair rather than solely from management. So that's my question.
Sorry, there's a report from the committee, the Audit and Risk Committee, just confirming that the report of their last meeting.
But it says that report is from Sean. It is not from the chair of the committee. So
my bad.
So that's
okay. Well, we'll rectify that in future. That's my error.
Oh, okay. So all right. So yeah, just I guess for the record, we do want to hear from the chair of each committee. And in the other instances, like for example, you know, a report later from Chris has actually signed it off, you know, so it's just from a governance perspective, the board does need to hear from the chairs.
Yeah,
of the
Ruth,
committee.
I agree wholeheartedly, Ruth, and I think that's it's more than just form. It's more than just form. So, you know, the chair should be the author of the memo.
Well, the signatory.
And
the buck, that's where the buck stops for the report, right? It doesn't stop with the, I mean, the CEO may be, the CFO may be the author, but it's the chair that's is responsible for reporting to the board.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so thank you. That's
not to preclude that. That's not to preclude the CFO from reporting directly to the board. Just make that clear. But in terms of reporting for the committee, I agree. I think Ruth has made an important point there.
Yeah. So thank you. Those were all the points that I had to make within the consent agenda.
Okay, does anyone else have has anyone else got anything to add or take away or question about the consent agenda matters for approval? Hearing none, I'll take the absence of any further comments as an approval of the draft agenda as amended by Ruth's request with respect to the minutes of the November 12th meeting. All right. So now we're going to be dealing with the main focus of today's meeting, which is the 2023 operating budget. And that is item 3.1 on your agenda under the rubric enhancing CPATA's governance. So the materials are found starting at page 15. And as you know, under our governance model, the operating budget is prepared and presented by the CEO, assisted by the CFO. but the CEO is ultimately responsible for presenting a balanced budget to the board. And the draft budget has been shared and reviewed by the Audit and Risk Committee to ensure that there's been an appropriate oversight and comment on the drafting. And you'll see that in the materials. Although the committee's role in the preparation of the operating budget is somewhat limited, I think both Daryl and the CFO and Sean have greatly appreciated their input into the development of this. So with that sort of brief introduction, I'm going to ask Daryl and Sean to present that. And I think we'll start with Sean Walker walking us through the operating budget. And that's my first, only, and last dad joke for the day. Okay.
Excellent.
Sean?
I will walk it away. Thanks, Tom. Excellent. Okay, Daryl, did you want to say anything before we start going through the presentation, or do you want me to just kick it off?
I think you can just kick it off. Our thoughts are in the memo, so.
Okay, and I'm going
Can
to.
I just ask a quick, do you want us to interject with questions? Like, I've got a number of questions. Do you want us to interject as you go through, Sean, or would it be best for you to finish your whole presentation and then field questions? How do you prefer?
I prefer to do the questions as we're going. That way it tends to
Okay.
be more impactful to the conversation if we can do it right at that time. However, if there is something that I'm going to address later on, I'll say let's hold that one. So we can roll it that way.
You know,
That
Ruth,
sounds good.
I wish every judge was like you. It would make my life so much easier. Okay.
Okay, so I'll try to interject my questions, and if there's not a logical place to do so, I'll ask them at the end. Thanks very much, Sean.
Okay. All right.
There you go, Sean. Thank you.
All right. Perfect. Can everybody see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. And there we go. Okay, so little history on the progress that's been made to date. And this is something we've looked at each meeting over the past couple of months. So you see things kicked off in the September-October timeframe when the CPATA staff and myself started working with Daryl on building like the forecast for the remainder of 2022, looking at some of the assumptions that we were going to build into the model, and came up with a first draft. That then went to the Audit and Risk Committee in October for some overall comments, and then we tweaked it a bit from those comments, and there was a draft presented, very high level draft presented or included in the package in the November planning sessions that the board had here in Halifax. We then took a more detailed copy of the budget back to the Audit and Risk Committee on November 23rd, and we spent a good amount of time going through each of the items, and there was some good suggestions made that we'll get into for changes. So we've incorporated those changes, ran it back by the committee via email, and now we are here on December 15th with a final draft with the intention and hope that everything goes smoothly or with only a few tweaks, and that we can have a January 1st planned implementation. Okay, so this slide really highlights some of the key messages and the key assumptions that we've made this year. The first one we talked about already is coming up with a balanced budget. So the goal would really to be either balanced or have a small surplus to work through the next year. We struggled this year to get to a balanced budget, so we didn't have any room to build in a surplus as we did this year or the prior year. The Finance and Risk Committee recommended and requested that we continue the $100,000 contingency amount. Initially, when we went back there in the beginning of November to them, we had it balanced, but no contingency. So we worked with them to come up with some ideas of items that could be either delayed into the future or changed. So we've done that. Another big note is, and we've talked about this before, is that our bylaws require that licenses the fees be set at $1,000 for 2023. So we don't have the ability to generate additional fee income by raising rates. But if new agents or licensees do join, that's how we could increase some of that revenue. Next note we'll get into in the next slide as well, but we're not seeing, from the survey results we got from Abacus, we're not seeing much, if any, growth anticipated in the profession in the next few years. So we factored that in. One of the mitigation items that the Audit and Risk Committee came up with was potentially reducing the number of in-person board meetings. So in the fall, a planned strategic planning or planning session perhaps would be done remotely versus in person, depending on how the finances look after that first half of the year. And then the financial reserve. So this is kind of your retained earnings or the balance once you finish the year, kind of what's left over. With a balanced budget and with the forecast for 2022, we're looking at about 358,000 kind of left in the net asset balance off to the side, and we'll get more into where we come up with that number soon. Okay, so I mentioned from the Abacus survey what we've seen around the percentage and the number of patent and trademark agents. So you can see there in the green box, this is the agents that have less than 5 years experience, and it's 13% for both patent and trademark agents. And where we have 2,250 agents that are we've got 750 full patent agents, 1,100 trademark agents, and then 4 dual agents. So they would hold both a patent and a trademark license. So really this 5%, or the 13% makes up about just under 300 agents. So when you think with 5 years experience, that's 300. So that's only about 60 new agents coming in per year. It's a pretty small number. And then when we look at the number of agents with 31 plus years of practice, again, it's 13% on the patent side and 16% on the trademark side. So we'll be looking at hopefully we'll be looking at a model where the newcomers are outweighing the red group there at say nearing the end of their career. And I just did some quick numbers, and just in 2022, we had 90 agents either request to surrender their license or change from a Class 1 license, and 73 applications for new Class 1s. So that's a 17 agent net reduction. But the good news is that we had 83 Class 3 applications. So those are the individuals that be writing exams and in the training. So once they pass and come along, then there is that potential to move them into Class 1 and full agents. Okay. So for the income side of the proposed budget, as I mentioned, we have $1,000 set Class 1 fee and then $1,500 for those dual agents. So they don't have to pay 2 full fees. It's like buy one, get one 50% off. Like a lot of Black Friday sales we've seen recently. And I mentioned the 2,250 licenses. So we're actually a little bit, when you factor in the number of agents versus the number of licenses, it's 2,200 licenses. The exam fees, we've actually increased the budget for 2023 by about 100 papers. This has been Jen and her crew have really been successful bringing on the writers and increasing those numbers, which has been a big shot in the arm, which has been very helpful. And the application fees, we've almost doubled what we've budgeted for 2023 compared to this year. Just seeing a greater number of those applications coming in, and a lot of them are like what I just mentioned around the application to surrender, the application to change category, things of that nature. Okay. So to show that with a Pac-Man graph, really, you'll see the big red section. So that's our license fees. And when we factor in Class 1, Class 2, and then Class 3, it's just over 90% of all income that we bring in. So about $2.1 million. As I mentioned, the exam fees, at 157, that makes up about 7%. And then our application fees and certificates make up the last 2 to 3%. So really, it's very easy to tell where our funds are coming from, where the lion's share of our funds are coming from. Okay. From the expense side, we'll walk through this again on the next couple of slides, but a couple of the high level items that are really the most important in driving the expenses. So wages and benefits. So we're maintaining the current model. So that's number of employees, but you'll see the costs have gone up because this is going to be the first year where we have the full complement of staff through the whole 12 months. And Judah will be starting here in a few weeks as well. Okay. The governance costs, so we'll talk about those as well as far as meeting costs and remuneration. You'll see that has increased from 2022 to 2023 in the budget. Professional fees, so we've got, there's an increase in there for complaints and discipline. So this is the hearing, the investigation costs. This is kind of where, say, the largest risk or the largest reward could be in the budget for next year. If we have more investigations that need to happen, these costs really can't be avoided. So they will be incurred, and some of them can be very expensive depending on the complexity of the complaint and then the investigation. But if we have a quiet year, then that's a potential area where we could save some funds. Okay. The exams, the program continues to evolve, and we're changing a bit the way it's presented, the way that exams are built and marked and graded. So that's been factored in. The college's insurance, this has gone up substantially, like many others across the country, seeing the risks going up and the rates. The D&O insurance is the largest increase, so that'd be directors and officers insurance for senior staff and the board of directors. And then office and admin expenses, the biggest change there that we're proposing or looking at or hoping is either a reduction in our credit card fees handled through either our Moneris or through another provider. And we'd also talked about a potential using the new class action lawsuit and having an admin fee or charge fee for credit card payments. But we've decided through Daryl and Andres and I talking about it, for the amount that we would receive in 2023, we're not sure that the risk outweighs the benefit. We thought it might bring in about $10,000, but we could spend more than that on legal fees and getting opinions if we're challenged on the way that we handle that fee. So that's kind of on hold for right now. Okay, perfect. So to chart out the expenses on a graph, you see it's much more even across the board. It isn't Pac-Man with a few smaller items. It's a few larger groups, and the biggest four really are the wages and benefits. That's area down the bottom right. Makes up, when you factor in the benefits, it's about 36% of total costs. Then we have the governance expenses down the bottom left at about 10% of the total expense budget. The up in the top left is the outsourced professional fees. So these are I'll call the pseudo staff. So this is the cost for Baker Tilly, so my team, the cost for Victoria's work through Pink Larkin and the works that she does, and then some communication support that we get as well. And then the other big chunk, the dark blue in the top, that's our professional and consulting fees. So these would be legal fees, human resources support, help assistance with admissions and the work that Principia is doing towards the exam and the competency initiatives. So that type of work falls in there. So those kind of the big four groups. Okay. And then this chart here kind of shows the statement of operations or balance or profit loss or income statement, if you will, broken down into those same main categories. And I've added in some percentages on the expenses so we can kind of see the change year over year. The revenue side's gone up slightly, most of that being those exam fees that we talked about with the extra 100 papers we're factoring in. And then the application fees and other. The budget for this year was just over 25,000. We've increased that just about 100% up to 53,000. And the forecast this year was slightly over 60,000. So we're about 10-15% less than this year's forecast, but we're trying to be a little conservative, figuring that that this year, with the first full year of CPATA's operations, that with the number of agents that surrendered or changed to Class 2, we won't see that next year. Is kind of the hope and the plan. And then, as I mentioned, expenses, the larger areas, so wages and benefits are going up by 15% year over year, and that's due to a small portion is due to the raises that are being provided, but also the annualization of the new staff and bringing on Judah as well. Governance expenses, so this relates to board and committee remuneration, travel, and meeting expenses. So if there's training or other costs involved there, and that's gone up by 62%. So that's a substantial increase. The outsourced professional services fees, we are seeing a lot more time required on the communication side and on the discipline side to deal with the new hearings and investigations that are expected. We are seeing a drop in the professional consulting fees. Most of that is due to the fact that we've now hired the new CEO. We don't plan to have any positions that need to be hired in 2023. So there's no contingency finder's fee that we'll hopefully need to pay to an HR consultant. So that's a savings there of about a little over 100,000. The registration exam cost, as we're getting more efficient and more, I'd say I'm getting to know the process more, a little more accurate on the budget process for there. So that's a bit of savings, almost 30%. And I did mention the insurance costs, which the budget this year was 27,000, but the actuals were a lot higher than that. So the budget for 2023 has been built on what we've seen this year for actuals. Okay, and then office administration, relatively flat. And then there's the contingency of 100,000 that we've built back in. Okay, and then you'll see down the bottom, this year we budgeted for a surplus of 80,000. And next year for 2023, the budget is presented as a balanced budget or zero bottom line. Okay. And then our last tab in the presentation is the statement of financial position for 2023. So this is your balance sheet. So the biggest areas here, there's two and a half areas that really need to focus on. So number one, of course, is cash. We need to make sure that we have the funds available at year end. So at December 31st, that would carry us to the beginning of the fee collection period in February and March. So we do have, the budget shows that we will have sufficient cash available for those first couple months. Same as like today, we have the cash in the bank that is going to enable us to get through to February. So all things being equal, that should be right on course. And then this year's surplus, the forecast, last set of financial statements that we prepared for October showed a surplus of around 113,000. So we had budgeted for 80,000, so this is an extra 33,000 on top of that. I am holding the right to change that now. There's been a number of invoices that have come in that have been a little higher than we forecasted. So when we finish up November here this week or next, we'll have a better idea on that, but it shouldn't be substantially different, but we'll know more very, very soon. And then the last number I wanted to show was this is that surplus that I talked about, the net asset or the reserve that I mentioned at the very beginning. This year we expect to end with a $245,000, or sorry, this year we started with a $245,000 set of amount in reserve. And then once we add the 113 for next year, or sorry, for this year, that gets us an opening balance of 358 to move forward, which is just about 2.5 months worth of expenses kind of in the bank. But then you'll see that the blank line there shows the balance budget for next year. So we expect that to remain stable. And that is the presentation.
Carol, anything to add before we open up the discussion?
No, well, yes. When you produce a budget like this, as close as it is, it is a bare bones budget. We've looked at every line, we've looked at every expense, recognizing that our revenue sources are minimal. The one area on the revenue side where there is a little bit of remaining uncertainty does relate to the number of licensees who will renew. So generally predictable, but the one factor that we're watching very closely is the insurance requirement for the end of this year. So you'll recall that licensees had to have their insurance in place by the end of December. Although the vast majority have done so, there are some that are lingering, and there are some who we believe will make the decision within the next 2 weeks to either be suspended or to surrender their licenses. And that will drive up that number a little bit higher than Sean showed earlier. So I had a conversation this morning with a lawyer trademark agent in Ontario. 2 or 3 trademark files not worth his while to pay the $2,000 or $3,000 additional dollars for insurance. He's going to change his license to a Class 2. So as I said, we're dealing with about 100, a little bit more than 100 people at this stage who we still don't have accurate information from. And that is the somewhat I'll call the wild card. We'll have a much better knowledge early in the new year, but it is a factor that causes me some concern. And the other issues we've identified in the memo, Sean has raised the question with regard to the governance expenses. I want to be very clear. From my perspective, I think we are following the right approach in terms of what a professional regulator needs to do with the outside expertise that members of the board and committees provide to us. It's crucial, but it's also expensive. And so we're watching very carefully those expenses and how we manage them most effectively. And I think at some point, the board, the committees, and the CEO may have to ask, is there some way to contain them? Because of the expenses. So that's the reason that I have included in the budget only one in-person board meeting. I've had discussions with the chair and vice chair about the approach to this. My personal view, and I think this would be certainly shared by them, is that the importance for this new organization of the board of directors working together and knowing each other and working effectively together is crucial to how we continue to evolve. So my expectation is that early in the new year, probably halfway through the year, you'll have a much better sense on whether some of the forecast expenses in the discipline side are going to be realized. If they're not, that will create some flexibility for planning for the second part of the year. As Sean said when he went through this, as hard as we've worked, particularly with Victoria, to predict what is going to happen, we simply can't. We do have several matters that are making their way through preparation for hearings, but we don't know yet whether those hearings will occur or whether those matters will be resolved. We've obviously budgeted as if they will occur. So those are the items. We've done everything we can, and we've really benefited from the advice of the Audit and Risk Committee to make this as realistic and as accurate as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you, Daryl. So I'd like to open it up now to the to members of the board for their questions or comments or concerns, and we'll try to deal with them one at a time.
Sean, you can probably take the presentation off so we have full screen.
Okay, sure.
Starting with Ruth, I guess. Ruth, you have, or
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I do have a couple of questions. So first of all, really want to compliment you, Sean, and the audit committee. It was an excellent package that you provided to us in advance. From my perspective, easy to follow format, well articulated explanations and rationale and caveats. And Daryl, I really appreciated your additional comments at the end and your walking us through this, Sean. It was very good. So I just wanted to preface my comments that way. So my first question is, you indicate in your planning notes that it's going to take 2 years to create a structural solution for our revenue problem, and that is, to change the fee amount in the bylaws. My question is, why will it take 2 years when there's an opportunity for bylaw revisions in the works right now that will come into force spring of 2023? That would tell me that we would only be 1 year tied to this lower amount, and in the next year we should be able to have had that amended. Am I missing something?
So we won't see the revenue until March of 2024. So you're right, it is 1 fiscal year, but we'll see it 15 months out from January 1, 2023.
Perfect. That's that. So I just wanted to make sure it is our intention to amend the bylaw in the spring of 2023 to create the correct revenue model. Is that right?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. So the bylaws will contain a provision allowing for, I'm going to call it cost of living, and that's a term of art as opposed to a specific description, for an automatic adjustment to the fees on an annual basis. And then you'll recall from the planning meeting, we also will begin to look at whether there are some alternate revenue streams that can be considered.
Right. Yep, that's perfect. It was just the timing caused me to feel concerned that we weren't going to get that revenue adjustment piece into the bylaws in 2023. So good, thank you. That answers my first question. My second point, I just want to augment what you said, Daryl, about the value of the board coming together. And I really appreciate the fact that if at all possible, we will have the board of directors meet in person twice a year, one time at the AGM and another for the strategic planning session in advance of preparing the business plan and budget. I think for the board to really have its influence on setting the direction of the organization, it's important that the board and management come together for that planning process. The other really interesting thing I just wanted to share with you all, I was in a governance session just yesterday, and this session was called how to have difficult conversations, something like that, around brave conversations, and the importance of the board being able to have fulsome discussions in a psychologically safe environment where they're able to ask those tough questions of the CEO that sometimes staff might not feel comfortable in asking, those kinds of things. And one of the studies showed that boards who meet together in person and establish those social relationships and those trust relationships are much better able to understand one another when they speak, and are less subject to unconscious bias, such as, I am assuming I know what you mean, and I am laying my filter over it, and I'm trying to interpret what you say through my filter as opposed to yours. So again, just lots of science and studies show that boards who meet together in person are more high functioning. So I really appreciate the fact that you said halfway through the year, once we have a look at what those discipline expenses might actually be, we might be able to still come together for our fall planning session. So really, really appreciated that.
And let me interject. That's also when the CEO working with the board chair will be able to determine if the contingency is an appropriate line to use for that purpose. If it hasn't been expended, if there are no plans with respect to it, it becomes creates an opportunity for that kind of planning for the second part of the year.
Right. And as we go forward and we right size our revenue model, it needs to include an opportunity for the board to come together to truly do its work as governors and protectors of the public interest. So thank you. Enough said on that. And Tom, I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Sure.
I'm done.
Okay, good. Thank you, Ruth. And I, you know, that the science you referred to, you know, it just seems to be intuitively correct, you know, that, I mean, I think we can all agree that when we've met in person, it's been an enormously good experience from an educational point of view, and social interactions on a board and with senior management, you know, have to be grown over time, and in-person meetings are important for that purpose. So thank you for those comments. On the budget presentation, any other comments, questions, concerns? Before keeping in mind that we are going to be approving this budget. I'm looking around the virtual room and I don't see anyone.
I think Andrew's got his hand up.
Andrew, thank you, Andrew. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you up there. Thank you, Andrew. Go ahead.
That's okay, Tom. Yeah, I was wondering what the thoughts were about also the intersection that we had with the IPIC annual meeting, because that was also, you know, a significant expense, and yet it also provided a chance to interact with the profession. And I suppose also, if there is not a budget for it, assuming that it would be appropriate for I guess particularly for myself and the profession to attend anyway and to discuss about what hat and approach I should be wearing. I'm not a member of IPIC, of course, during this time period, but I did feel that that was a really tremendous opportunity as well for us, not only to get together, but to speak with the profession. And I'm also very glad that we are doing this. This is being recorded for the profession, because there has been the I guess the sticker shock that some of the professions were indicated about the change in fees, and yet at the same time, what enforcement pressures are being put on CPATA. And I'm just delighted that that's actually getting out, and the whole profession can see that this is a tension that the board is working hard to balance. And that's it.
So in terms of your first question, Andrew, the budget does not include attendance at the IPIC conference in Winnipeg, but the comments I made earlier with regard to planning for the second half of the year apply to that as well. That conference is in the fall, and there will be opportunities to look at that option once the early part of the year plays out.
And you know, if I may, Andrew, that's a really important point that I had not thought of when I was doing my review of the budget. We might even have to come up with some sort of a hybrid model, because the world is great at hybrid right now, where maybe the whole board doesn't attend. Maybe you know, key members of the board that have specific, you know, I don't know, interests or relationships or something like that, depending on what the issues of the day are. Maybe we send some members, but not all. We might be able to just find our way and course correct as we get closer to right touch regulation with the right funding model. So thank you.
Great.
Okay.
Yes, Brigitte, please go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with what Ruth said, that maybe not only from a budgeting perspective, but as a perception as well to the licensees, that we're not spending so much to bring all of the board members there. So from that perspective as well, I think it might be a good idea to only have some members go.
Yes, okay, that's noted as well. And yeah, so that's sort of, yes, that's a sort of a halfway, you know, I mean, you could send a few people as opposed to the whole board, right? Okay, that's a very useful comment to keep in mind. Any other comments or questions about the budget and the presentation that we received?
Tom, if it's Sean again, if I could just add, just as a piece of information for the board, just when considering like the in-person, like the IPIC conference or the travel, like like the IPIC conference was around 23,000 was the cost to send the people that went, and the planning session in Halifax was about 26,000, including the travel time, 22 without it. So just when for planning purposes, I kind of use almost a 25,000 per meeting thought when we're thinking going forward.
Okay, great. That's something to keep in mind as we think about that as we move through 2023. Okay, I actually have two questions. The first is the data on which we have based the assumption that there will be that the growth in the professions are flat or are anticipated to be flat. That's based on survey data for our jurisdiction. And I'm just wondering if we've had a chance to look at similar data in other jurisdictions to see whether we're part of a trend or whether we're an aberration, and whether if there's something in the regulatory environment that we need to fix to bring us into line with other. Because I find, like, with an expanding economy like the one we would have, I would have anticipated that the numbers would be ticking up, not staying flat. So do we have any information on that? Like, are we making the correct assumptions?
So there are two factors. One is the survey data, and the other is now we have 2 years of experience. So it's the combination. We have not done any outside looking. What we're imagining, if I can use that word, is that with the economy and with the work we're doing around the registration process, especially with regard to the exams, you'll recall we talked about pursuing alternate pathways into the profession. Our commitment is to create a mode of more people being able to come into the profession without sacrificing anything with respect to standards. Our conclusion with all the work we've done on the exams and the issue of a training program and things like that suggests that that has been a significant barrier because we created an exam system without a training regime. So you'll recall we've reported to the board previously that we have analyzed that the major reason for the significantly low pass rate relating to the exams is that there is not a consistent and high quality training opportunity available for all applicants. So we think by fixing that, it will increase the numbers and the opportunities for coming into the profession. That's a hypothesis. It's not provable yet. We're another probably 18 months away until we have the first set of new exams. But that's the assumption that's built into all the work we're doing in that area.
Well, further thought and research on that point, I think, would be an important element for planning in the years ahead, not just from a financial perspective in terms of revenue, but in terms of just sort of, when we talk about when Ruth talks about right sizing regulation, I mean, one of the aspects has got to be like, why is it that these numbers are staying flat when the economy is changing? This doesn't seem to me to make sense, but it could be something that's systemic within the Canadian economy that it just remains flat. I don't know. I'm sure there's other people like Leonora and others around the table that might be able to comment on that, but it's worth just thinking about.
Yeah. I know Andrew's got a comment, Leonora might, and I've got a comment to share on that too, Tom.
Okay, yeah. So we'll do that quickly, and then I have one more question, and then we'll try to take the vote and move on. Sorry, Andrew.
So it's just a qualitative data point from which is speaking with our American colleagues, and they speak of that it's difficult to recruit for patent agent side anyway, and the trademark agent side is different anyway, but difficult to recruit on the patent agent side, partly because the STEM jobs themselves are so lucrative. To put somebody through the extra level of going through this training is difficult, and the U.S. profession in particular has a bias towards lawyers, so that creates another barrier. You got a STEM degree, then you have to go off to law school. So it's qualitative, but not dissimilar from what I sense is happening here.
Interesting. Okay, Ruth.
I see the same thing. We see the same thing happening in the accounting profession, Tom. Actually, we've been spending quite a bit of time on this because we're seeing this, you know, almost flat, if you will, like people retiring and people coming in. It's, you know, so we're looking at other things like foreign trained professionals and what are our paths to the profession, and are there any barriers that we're not aware of? Are there diversity and inclusion barriers that we might not be conscious of? That, you know, so we're, as a profession, the accounting profession is looking at this because we're seeing a similar sort of trend across the country. It varies province to province, of course, but we're seeing a similar trend. So I don't think we're an aberration on this. Interestingly, yeah.
Okay, so well,
And
that's,
let me just add one thing on
Go ahead.
that, Tom, because it's, we identified early on that this is a global profession in the sense that not only is the work done that Canadian licensees do has an extraterritorial reach, but we've believed from the very outset that we would see practitioners from other jurisdictions wanting to come to Canada. And so from the very outset, we established a regime to allow us to register those people. We have not been overwhelmed, but there have been some. Leonora, before she became a director, was instrumental in assisting us in developing a previous education analysis and a previous experience analysis. So we could look at what someone had done in another state, another country, and determine what was required for them to qualify for us. As part of the new bylaws, we are trying to more formalize the foreign practitioner piece, because I have felt, I think Jen would agree with me, that one of the things we need to be able to do is attract practitioners from other countries to come here as long as they're qualified. And that just fits into a broad immigration system. And so we have to play our part in that. It's not something we have had the opportunity to do extensively yet, but if you can't help but look at the world and say, this ought to be a source of growth for both the Canadian economy and for this profession. So not going to be huge numbers, but we need to be equipped to be able to bring internationally educated and internationally trained practitioners into our system.
I see that very much as part of the whole.
We're just not there yet.
Yeah, I mean, it really is about barriers to, you know, where are there barriers? Where are they? You know, are they artificial? Are they real? Are they necessary? It's like, I mean, these are all big questions, but I just, you know, I don't think we should just leave the assumption that there's going to be no growth alone. I think we have to get behind that as well. All I'm saying. But anyway, that was really good. So thank you.
Leonora has her hand up, Tom.
So I'm sorry, Leonora. I'm sorry. I'd love to hear from Leonora. I'm sorry. Please go ahead. I can't hear you, Leonora. Can anybody else? No, nobody else can. No. What? Can't even hear what it was. Well, okay, look, I'm going to ask my second question. Leonora, you figure out your sound problems, and I'm going to come back to you. Does that make sense? I'm going to do that. Okay. So my next question, I wanted to ask you about a comment that's made at page 15 of the materials, which is this. It's the first point, and it says, the recently approved changes to policy on board and committee remuneration may be red flag. Until it becomes better understood, it appears that we are foregoing programs in order to compensate outside expertise. Rigorous meeting planning and reducing meetings may be required. So I think you've explained that in part in your presentation, that we've had, you know, and there's obviously a very significant increase in these costs. But what did you mean by it appears that we are foregoing programs in order to compensate outside expertise? Could you just explain that? I didn't quite understand what that meant.
So the as we built the budget and we put the numbers around the governance costs, those were numbers, I'll call them fixed. We don't have much discretion with respect to them. So it eliminated our ability to introduce any type of additional programming costs. So one of the things, and I'm not suggesting there was a requirement for additional staff for this organization. I think we're fine at this point. But one of the things we did look at through the past year was how do we provide effective governance support for the board and all the committees. They are an extensive, they use extensive staff resources to support them. If I had my druthers and we had the money, I would be recommending a dedicated governance support person for the committees so that it wasn't taking time from the CEO, wasn't taking time from the director of registration, particularly to support the committees. So for example, we have Victoria as an outside consultant who's taking minutes for some of her committee meetings. That's not a very good use of her expertise. Unfortunately, we couldn't do that. So that's one example of what I mean by we're foregoing program expenses. And it's not all tied to one item. It just, when you look at the global budget, we just didn't have the capacity, financial capacity to do that, which I think would really, if we could invest $5 in governance support, my view is we'd get $10 back on programmatic development in almost every area of the organization, because by doing what we're doing right now, a significant chunk of time is spent weekly, daily, weekly, and monthly to support committees. That's
okay. Okay, well,
Tom,
that's,
can I ask a follow-on question
yes,
on that?
please. And then, yes, and when we're finished, I don't want to forget Leonora because I want to come back to her, but please go ahead, Ruth, while we're on the point.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So, so that question, Tom, thanks, caused me to realize that just the way the package is put together, there's a whole bunch of financial information again at the end of the package. And I did have a few questions on that
Sure,
weren't
yeah.
in just because of the way it was put together. So one of the things, Daryl, that you were just talking about in terms of support and, paying external support, the GR piece, the government relations piece, got really, really high last year. And I do note that we're going to use a different approach to government relations that will save costs in the future. Am I recalling that correctly?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know. The other quick thing I wanted to ask, you note in the report on the audited financial statements that currently we've prepared our annual report and it's been tabled, but we're delayed in posting our amounts paid and remuneration to directors. So my question is there a plan to coordinate that report timing in future?
I'll flip that to Sean.
Yeah, Sean, do you know what I'm referring to? Do you want me to read it to you? Want me to read it in?
Yeah, where about?
Yeah, so let me just read it. It is page 48 of our package. It says, we have prepared a report which shows the amounts paid as remuneration and expenses to directors and committee members during 2021. Bylaw 30 requires that this information be made public at the time the college submits the annual report to the minister. We are delayed in posting this information. So you tell the board you're delayed, but it doesn't say, do you have a plan to coordinate and align that timing going forward?
Sorry, yes, that should have been updated to say we did post it back in September.
Perfect.
And when we did the annual report in March, we missed this requirement, so we didn't know that it was supposed to have been done. So the plan is, yes, that will be done as part of that'll be done as part of the audit work as well.
Thank you so much. That's what I thought, but I just wanted to highlight it here for the record. Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Anything else, Ruth? You got more comments, Ruth? Okay. And Leonora, could I come back to you then?
Yes, yeah, thank you, Ruth, for asking that question. That was one of my questions, so thank you. Takes some time. Yeah, so the only thing we were talking about barriers to entry, the other area I think that we really have to sit down and think about is the whole the whole procedure for our, well, I'm calling it articling, but it's not. And how that's really hit and miss. And I know that some firms have trouble recruiting people, but other firms aren't doing it. And we just really need something that's gets accessibility to potential class 3 licensees to that, to the training that they need. And it is, you know, as we've been discussing, there's a curriculum. You know, the law societies have gone through this for years with articling with mixed success, I would say. But at least they
a very successful law practice program in Ontario, I might
well,
say.
maybe so, but that came after many of us didn't get that opportunity. But that comes after, you know, 3 years of law school, whereas the only training to become a patent agent is essentially really is the training.
Yeah.
You know, particularly for patent agents. So
Yeah,
so I do think that's something that it's a big picture thing, but it's it's really difficult, and it's not the case. It's easier in the United States because you don't have to do that. That may impact the quality of the profession overall. But yeah, if we want quality, we have to really put some effort into it. And the college, I think that's a college responsibility to get that organized.
So I just want to remind the board that we're starting a project now looking at the whole training program regime. So we have a consultant working with us, and we've reached out this week to all the law school-based IP clinics in the country to introduce ourselves and begin a conversation with them. So we're pulling that information together, and we will have available, the plan is to produce a discussion paper for the end of Q1 of 2023 that will begin to look at, you know, how do we deal with the training system itself, and there are several components to it. One's been identified already. So the United States has the requirement for a STEM degree. We don't have that. Should we not? I'm not offering a view. It's an issue. We have the 24-month training program. The 24 months is arbitrary. There is no history. No one can identify why 24 months was chosen, and it just exists. And we need to be able to identify what are the modalities of training that we think should exist, and is 24 months the period that will take to acquire them. Leonora identified a significant issue that we're monitoring regularly, which is the vast difference in experience and quality of training based on the office you're in. Some of the larger firms have very sophisticated and advanced training programs. Not all of them, but some do. And it goes all the way from there to people training with sole practitioners, and in effect, they eat what they kill. And we can't identify that they're getting any training at the knee of a principal. So there's that. And then there's the question of, should we look at the English model, which is a university-based training program, which is, as you know, in England, it's the Queen Mary program. It's 12 months of university-based education that you need to take before you come into the system. So I think all those are things that need to be on the table for CPATA to look at over the next number of months. It's right now, it's really is hit and miss. And the other piece, and my last comment on this, is there's both the challenge with regard to the quality of the education. That's a significant issue. There's an equally concerning issue, which is what's happening in the workplace, because Class 3 licensees are potentially, and in some instances, actually vulnerable in the workplace because they have no bargaining chips with their employers. And we have some exposure. It's not dramatic yet, but there's no reason to suggest that recent reports that have come out of the law societies with regard to issues of harassment and discrimination in the articling system do not apply word for word to our training regimes. So it's an issue that the college needs to be concerned about. We spent a little bit of time on it in November. And I think you'll see it coming forward in the strategic framework that I'm bringing back to the board. So it's really significant. So those are all factors that kind of come on the table. We can have all the training in the world, but if people are in a terrible workplace, it doesn't help them any. So these are all things that need to be part of our consideration.
Okay, so thank you, Daryl, for that. Now I'm gonna, Jennifer, I see Jennifer's got her hand up, and then Karima, I think maybe Jennifer wants to get in on this conversation, and so I'll do that, and then I'll move to Karima, and then I think we should wrap it up because we are focused on budget now. We're talking about, we're in Ruth's domain here, so.
I just have
we
a very quick comment to build off of what Daryl's saying, and to your point, Tom, earlier about what's happening in other jurisdictions. The research paper that we are working on will have a look at the programs and pathways that are available in other jurisdictions, and we'll take a look at whether or not those are, or components of those are more valuable, successful, efficient than others. And I'm hoping that will give us a better idea of what's available and what options are out there, and what works and what doesn't. There's also a component of that review that looks to see if there's any EDI concerns from those pathways that we should be aware of, any barriers or any other research that's been done in other jurisdictions on that topic with respect to licensure. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, now, so Karima. And then Jeff's got his hand up too, so Karima?
I think Daryl and Jennifer really addressed some of the points that I wanted to make. Just a couple of thoughts, Jennifer, as you're going down this path. You might want to reach out to my tax as well, because they did have a program in place, and I don't know if you've connected with them. If you haven't, I can introduce you to somebody who's quite involved. And the other piece of it is it would be interesting to see what these law firms are doing to get these programs up and running. I'm sure a lot of them would be quite prepared. The ones that really do have high success rates would be quite prepared to share that information, because I think it should inform some of what we should be thinking about. I agree with Leonora. It is something that concerns me in terms of the ability to have that kind of engagement from a regulatory perspective.
Okay, good. Everybody's taking that on board. And Jeff.
Hi, yes. Daryl, I just wanted to get some clarification on the point you were making about foreign practitioners. I'm assuming that we're talking about attracting talent to settle in Canada, as maybe agents that were foreign qualified and meet the requirements for the qualifications here in Canada. Simply getting foreign practitioners on the register, if that's what we're looking at, may provide a onesie or twosie bump to CPATA's fees, but it's certainly not of any benefit to Canadians. For somebody practicing abroad with their foreign clients, simply working before the Patent Office in Canada. I think what we're trying to encourage, if I understood you correctly, was that qualified foreign practitioners would actually be attracted to settle here and practice as agents in Canada.
Yeah, the nomenclature is a little bit confusing because we've created the concept of foreign practitioners as someone who can be on the register. So I'm talking about what I'll call the internationally educated or internationally trained practitioners who we seek to emigrate to Canada.
Yeah. Okay, and I see that this is generating some interesting. Leonora, did you put your hand down or did you put it up?
Well, I put it up just to say residency is a requirement to apply for class 3.
Right.
So
yeah,
that is one of the.
Good point. Very good point. Okay, so now I just want to just to remind the board, unless there are any further questions, I'd like to put the resolution to the board, and I'm not seeing that anybody has any further questions or comments. So the resolution is be it resolved that the board approve the 2023 operating budget materials, including the 2023 budget package and the CFO presentation. So I'd like to have.
I shall move.
Okay, moved and seconded by Leonora. All in favor? Okay. Seeing, okay, approved unanimously. Thank you. So that's done. Thank you very much for that, and a very interesting discussion and some follow-on points that we've noted, and we'll have to come back to those later. But I just wanted to say that in the context of the budget discussion, I mean, I think that's exactly what the kind of stuff that we're talking about is really what we all signed up for. So that it's really now we're moving into territory that we're all interested in really making some headway on. So that's terrific. So I want to now turn to the next item on the agenda, which is under our usual agenda item of CPATA as a modern regulator. And this is item 4.1, which is the submission that we've received on unauthorized practice from IPIC. And you'll recall we've spoken about it earlier. We attended the IPIC conference earlier this fall, and our CEO, Daryl Pink, made a presentation, and you'll recall that he was asked about CPATA's plans regarding the prosecution of unauthorized practice. And you'll also recall that he responded that we didn't have a policy at this point, and that we were going to have to develop one. But I think it's fair to say that he stated that whatever the policy would be, it would be consistent with our regulatory standards. And in considering that as a policy issue, we would consult the profession, including IPIC. Okay, but we actually haven't started that process yet. We haven't announced that we've started the process yet. But IPIC, I guess, took the presentation at the conference as an invitation to make a submission. So we do have one, and we thought it would be in looking at the agenda, we thought it would be prudent to bring it to the board's attention and have a discussion about it. We have set our priorities for the coming year, as you know, and although unauthorized practice isn't presently an immediate priority for us, it is an issue, obviously, and it's an issue that most regulators have to deal with at one point or another. So I think what I'm going to do is, and I should also say that our Act does have some provisions that do allude to unauthorized practice, or who's licensed and who's not. So I think we should open it up for a discussion. And so what we have before you is a draft resolution, which you can find at page 2, just before we open up the discussion. And it says, the resolution states as follows: whereas CPATA recognizes that section 67 and 68 of the CPATA Act limit the use of the title patent agent or trademark agent, or of persons representing themselves as such, if they are not licensees of CPATA, and whereas the Act is not clear on the mandate of CPATA regarding enforcement of these provisions, and whereas there need to be discussions with ISED regarding the application of these provisions, and here's the resolution. Be it resolved that the CEO, following necessary consultation, is to report and provide advice to the board on all aspects of addressing allegations of unauthorized practice at the board meeting in March 2023. So that would be a task that would fall to our new CEO if the board adopts that resolution today. All right. So with that introduction, I think I will ask Daryl Pink if he has any comments that he wishes to make before throwing it open for a broader discussion amongst the board members.
Just very briefly, by way of a little bit of background information. So when we started in the spring of 2020, early discussions with Industry Canada did revolve around where responsibility for unauthorized practice rested. And there were discussions with them about what the responsibility of government is in this area, given that the Act is not clear. There is one provision in the Act that does authorize the college to make an application to the federal court, but that's for the injunctive relief. It does not apply to prosecutions. And so we looked at whether the issue of prosecution would be dealt with through Industry Canada and the Public Prosecution Service of Canada. We've had several follow-up discussions with them. None have advanced very far. I think it's fair to say that they have little interest in doing this. That's my perception, as opposed to a fact, but that's my perception. And that is an issue that we need to deal with. The report or the submission from IPIC is interesting. I think we can all have our own views on whether it's correct and whether the case law and the authority that they cite in the report stands for the propositions that they suggest they do. I have my doubts, but that's a personal view. And I'll say finally, it was really nice for me to be able to draft a resolution that was going to have the work done by Judah.
Especially on such a, such an easy peasy issue like unauthorized practice. It's a simple one. Okay. Well, with that,
I think from a practical perspective, I mean, Tom, you alluded to the fact that UIP, we did talk about it in November. It is referenced in the draft document I'm working on with a strategic framework. I don't think I was going to say we can't avoid it, nor should we want to. It is an important public policy piece. And if the profession believes it's really important to address, it behooves us to do so that we're clear in terms of what our position is. And I think that's the reason that it may get elevated in terms of the priorities. I'm not saying that, I don't know what the outcome will be, but any issue that has had cases where there have been prosecutions, particularly the one in Quebec, it requires us to treat it seriously, and I'm not suggesting anything other than that. And I think this resolution will cause us to do that because it will get back on the board's agenda.
No, and I wouldn't want to suggest otherwise either. It is a very important issue, and as I've said, it's an important issue for any professional regulator. What you're going to do, and what the scope is for your ability to do anything about it. I mean, realistically, and there's all sorts of considerations. So it is not. I think it's fair to say, though. I think it is fair to say that the issue isn't simple, and it needs to be fully worked up, and it needs to be fully considered. And I think as the chair of the board, I think we can all appreciate that kind of, because it's a multi-sided issue, it's one that does require careful consideration, because whatever we decide to do is going to be setting a blueprint going forward, and we have to try to get it right the first time. Because if it needs to be fixed, we've got to break it and fix it again, and that's just not something that I think we want to do. Okay, but I can see hands up all over the place, so I'm going to shut up now, and I'm going to ask people to weigh in. But I'm first going to ask, before turning to the directors, is if we could have Victoria's input into this discussion, because I think she will have some valuable insights from her professional experience doing this over the years.
Thanks, Tom. I did spend a number of years dealing with unauthorized practice allegations, and I just want to echo what you've said and what Daryl said. It can generate a significant amount of work, and what's critically important for a regulator is to stay truly laser focused on the public interest. There's no question that there is a threshold above which there is risk to the public that there may be a role for CPATA to address. But there's a role for CPO, and there's a role for ISED, and there's a role for IPIC. And so there may be a collaborative approach that would be appropriate here. And the second thing is that one of the things that we learned from addressing this more recently in Nova Scotia was the importance of having a very clear threshold, a crystal clear threshold, as much as possible, as to when we'll get involved and why, and that threshold is focused on evidence of harm to the public and not just harm, potential harm to licensees. You know, there are, as Tom said, multiple facets to this, one being securing a monopoly, but another being actual risk of harm. And where do we fall? And as a fledgling regulator, where we just had a budget discussion about whether or not we can afford to even regulate our members, I think we have to walk before we run. And I would hope that those budget considerations are also brought into this as well.
Yes, well, I definitely. I mean, I don't think you can have a robust and complete policy discussion about something like that without looking at costing models. I mean, you know, it would be irresponsible not to do that. Now, so I think I'll go alphabetically. So Andrew, can I start with you? Oh, Jeff just put his hand up, but Andrew was first, so I'm going to stick with you, Andrew. Go ahead.
Everything I think the group I've been hearing saying this, I'm nodding my head and resonating with it. One item I'm just wondering if we can keep in our consciousness is that again, there's this pull in the profession from, gee, we're allergic to the fact that the fees have gone up. And then we got this other pull in the other direction saying, please go and spend some more money. So I think there just may be something to think about in terms of a messaging to the profession about, you know, what are your priorities here, especially given all of the other comments that Victoria made. And then I'm not sure I'm going to either say something intelligent here, something incredibly stupid, but I thought I heard Daryl say that there was a thought about maybe getting the prosecution service involved, you know, getting this off to the Crown altogether. And I recall a process where one could lay in information so that maybe as much as CPATA gets into it is simply getting the prosecution ready and handing it off to the Crown attorney and then backing off of it rather than trying to have a full enforcement mechanism ourselves or trying to have the Crown will do it. Again, that may have been intelligent or incredibly stupid, and I'll stop my comment there and let Jeff chime in with something that's definitely intelligent.
No, that's not. I mean, you know, I think all things have to be looked at and examined. You know, there may very well be some very practical barriers to that kind of an approach, and Daryl, I think, has alluded to them. They've got lots of things on their plate. They just may not feel that prosecuting patent agents or alleged patent agents is really high on their list. But anyway, but nothing, I think, should be off the table at this point. I think that's definitely something that we should look at, or that as we develop the policy. So
yeah, I was proposing something, trying to find something slightly in between, which was just the lay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. So Jeff, go Jeff, and then we'll go with Leonora.
Yeah, I think everything that everyone has said is absolutely correct. I think though what this requires is a study, at least. I mean, we keep talking about how much it's going to affect the budget, how big of a problem it's going to be, but we haven't studied this enough to understand the scope of the issue. Maybe there's 3 firms practicing as unauthorized entities, and it's like, you know, a slam dunk. I mean, it's not like the law societies who have tens of thousands of lawyers out there, you know, one more practicing in an unauthorized manner is, you know, something different than when you only have 1,000 people for Canadians to approach to get, you know, patent work done, for example. And, you know, one more, you know, out there is a significant number versus, you know, one more on tens, if not almost hundreds of thousands, right? So we need to study it to understand it before we can actually, you know, either move forward with a process or throw it in a trash bin, but it needs to be studied. And I think the resolution is suggesting that we talk about after appropriate consultations. I'm assuming that consultations is broad enough to include, you know, a study, as I'm suggesting. And if not, I would amend the resolution to ensure that it says consultations and study.
Sure. Well, if you I would take that. I'm sure, I don't imagine that that would be considered a hostile amendment, so I'm sure we can amend it to read that. Leah, so you're proposing that it be amended to suggest that the CEO report back and provide advice to, so consultations and study. That's what you'd like to see?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just based on, so that it's not based on just, you know, people's feelings and anecdotal evidence. We need to study.
So I think consultation and study would be broad enough to cover that. But you know, Judah's going to be the carrying the can on this, and you know, I don't want to anticipate, but I expect it's going to be pretty good. But but I think everyone would agree that that's obviously something, or that seems to me something that he should obviously have the discretion to do in preparing proper advice to us on various options and so on. So I think that would be included. But let's say that the resolution's amended to say following necessary consultations and studies, or study. Okay, is that agreeable to everyone? I think so. Yes. Okay, Leonora.
Yeah, I was going to comment on the scope of the resolution as well.
Oh, okay.
because you know, for my years of drafting contracts and drafting patents, I didn't think it was really fair to put on Judah's shoulders. He's going to report back to us on all aspects of addressing allegations. I mean, maybe everybody else is comfortable with that, but that seems like a pretty big job for Judah to take. I mean, I certainly think he should be given some leeway, or his progress to maybe he should be reporting back in March, because it is urgent to come to a decision on this. Maybe he should be coming back to report on his progress, to provide all aspects, to give him, if he's Superman and he gets it all done, great. But otherwise, I think we should give him a little wiggle room. The other thing, I just wanted to agree with Victoria, and she made some interesting comments. One is that what you need to be looking at is when, you know, what we might do, of course, but what the threshold is, when would decide to take action. And the other, she mentioned this, she didn't really go into it, but she said collaboration.
Yeah, so I made those two notes, exactly those two notes.
Yeah, and so I do think we have to think about that, because IPIC, for example, they have a committee that will that decides whether they're going to intervene in court cases, and they get practitioners to volunteer to do that work. And if this is important to IPIC, maybe IPIC will help us, and the way that they for many years were helping to draft it, I think still do, find people to write to draft the exams, prepare the exams. So maybe that would be an avenue to collaborate, to see if we can collaborate. I'm not sure if it's appropriate, and that's something maybe Judah wants to look at, but he should maybe talk to IPIC about whether there are some resources that they could make available to us. For example, if we were going to seek injunctive relief, not, you know, under the provisions of the CPATA Act that IPIC points out, you know, and so I do think that those are things we ought to really consider, and find every resource we can at the best possible price, so to speak, to help everybody out. That was it.
Okay, that's great. And okay, did we have any other comments? Obviously, Judah's going to have a lot. He's going to have a lot of information to gather, and no doubt many sources of information to consult. So that'll be working. But I do think, Leonora, that your definitely the proposed changes to the wording of the motion, I think, is appropriate, unless anyone else has any disagreement with that. We should, I think, further amend the resolution to say that the CEO is to report on his progress to the board on all aspects of addressing the allegations of unauthorized practice at the board meeting in March of 2023. Is that an acceptable amendment to everyone? Okay. So then the resolution as amended will read, whereas CPATA recognizes that sections 67 and 60, I'm sorry, I should have asked, does anyone else have any comments or questions? I think we're done. Okay. Whereas CPATA recognizes that section 67 and 68 of the CPATA Act limit the use of the title patent agent or trademark agent, or of persons representing themselves as such if they are not licensees of CPATA. And whereas the Act is not clear on the mandate of CPATA regarding enforcement of these provisions, and whereas there need to be discussions with ISED regarding the application of these provisions, be it resolved that the CEO, following necessary consultations and study, is to report on his progress to the board on all aspects of addressing allegations of unauthorized practice at the board meeting in March of 2023. I think I've got that right. Do we have a mover for that resolution? Leonora, seconder, please. Karima. And all in favor? Okay, everyone's, that's approved unanimously. Okay, thank you. All right, Judah, you, you have your work cut out for you. All right, is there anything else on that anyone wants to address on that last item before we move that, because that's the last item on the agenda and we're going to move in camera for our in-camera session. There are some information items. Ruth, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question about one of the information items. So,
okay.
Okay, so there was a great memo from Chris on the investigations committee approval of policy and guidelines. I thought that was really great. One of the things mentioned in there is maintain security and chain of custody of records and adhere to CPATA's file retention and destruction policies. Has the board seen the retention and destruction policies? I don't recall that.
No.
Carol?
No, because they're embryonic. So
that link
sorry, that wasn't a fair answer. So we are governed by the provisions of the Library and Archives Canada Act. And so Andres is working with Library and Archives Canada, who are assisting us in developing a document, a retention and destruction policy. And whatever we develop has to meet their requirements. So the provision at this point and the approach we are required to take is we destroy nothing because we don't have a policy yet. And the policy will allow us to do that, but we're probably months away. This is, it's important, but it's not urgent. And they have a very kind of, we're a small client for them. So I think Andres, maybe sometime in 2023, we'll begin to get some support from them in terms of what our policy needs to look like, but it will not be early in 2023. It's my take on what we've learned so far.
Makes sense. I guess my question is that a policy that would come to the board, if not for approval, at least for input?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay. Leonora?
Yes, hi, thanks. My question is also regarding the excellent report of the investigations committee. And this is really more for my edification, and you may hear my dog also barking his comments too. I'm sorry, but I just wanted to check on page 40 to 41, the sections 2.2, the procedure set out in sections 2.2 and 2.3. There's really, this is kind of 2.2 particularly is voluntary. And if the person, that's not really provided in the statute, but if the person under investigation won't agree, that at that point, CPATA would seek a warrant. Did I understand the procedure correctly?
That's correct. There's a limited authority for the investigations committee to compel a licensee to provide information unless they consent. It's another unfortunate aspect of the act, and so they've put in a considerable detailed authority in relation to obtaining search warrants and orders for production. And so that's what we have to do if somebody decides not to cooperate with handing over materials. We will hope to do most of it by consent, and thus far, with one exception, we've been successful.
And is there a plan? I know we've been talking about changes to the bylaw changes, but would it require actually a change to the act?
Yes, I'm afraid so.
Give that more meat, more behind it?
Yeah, basically, the one thing on my wish list for the act is to expand the authority of the investigations committee. You know, there is at least one matter that's been sent to hearing that does not need to go to hearing. And so there's an expense and a time that doesn't have to be there if the committee could deal with it. And on the issue of compelling cooperation in terms of provision of file materials and the like, you know, to avoid having to go to the federal court to obtain a warrant or production order, that's going to be expensive and time consuming. And so that's just, you know, don't get me started.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Leonore, for that really interesting question and that great response. Thanks. Any other questions on the information packages that we received with the agenda materials? Okay, so I think we can adjourn the public portion of the meeting, and we'll go in camera now with our CEO, and then we'll have.
And Tom, I wonder if for this first part of the meeting, whether Judah could be also invited to.
Yes,
stay
by all
for-
means, please. Yes, yes, of course, by all means, yes.
I just wanted to remind everyone. So I'm going to assign Tom as the co-host for the in-camera session.
This is the guy that couldn't find his way onto the call. All right. You sure you want to do this on? All right.
Wait, there's more. There's more.
Oh, wait, there's more.
So you just have to make sure that no external participants are put into the webinar.
Okay, great.
Thank you. So I'm just going to stop the
have a
recording.
quick question
Go,
about,
Bridget's got one question before we go.
yeah, just about the AGM dates for the public meeting in Ottawa. Is that date already set in stone? Just because I have a international conference that I have to attend, so. But if it's set in stone, then I'm going to figure things out. The May 24 to 26 in Ottawa.
So it's not set in stone because nothing is booked. The only obligation is that we have to have the AGM prior to. Well, no, there is no obligation. So I take that back. That's just a replication of last year, as close as possible.
I'll just send an email around after then to propose other dates if possible.
So just if I may, I know I need to be there as incoming chair, and my calendar in May is already crazy booked. So the sooner if we're trying to change any dates, the sooner we do it, the better. Also, I was at another meeting about, I don't know, a few weeks ago, and I wanted to bring this up. Apparently, May in Ottawa is totally booked. Like, if you want to get anything in Ottawa for May, you needed to do it a while back. So I don't know if that's true or not, but we might want to make some hotel reservations and that sort of thing, secure them. You can always cancel them, but just FYI.
Thanks for that.
Doing any better for you?
While we're on, sorry, I'm not sure. Could